Good morning. My name is Susan Selke, and this is my husband, Richard. We're the mother and stepfather of Clay Hunt, a Marine combat veteran who died of suicide in March of 2011 at the age of 28. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about this critically important topic of mental health care access at the VA, suicide among veterans, and especially about the story and experience of our son, Clay. Most of you here today are aware of the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention for American Veterans Act, signed into law February of 2015. We will address some of the contents of that bill in a few moments, but first I want to give you a brief overview of Clay's story, as it is one that I believe is not necessarily unique to Clay, but is the story of many of our veterans who are dying of suicide every day. Unfortunately, that number is reported to be increasing in certain reports, meaning we must act with even greater urgency to stem the tide once and for all.
Good morning. After Susan shares Clay's story with you, we're going to offer some ideas for action steps in several areas which we believe can benefit our veterans' care and support and prevent suicide. These include the VA as a stress-free environment for our veterans, the essential integrity the essential integrity of the VA system, and increased awareness and education for veterans, families, friends, loved ones, everybody, all of us. The number of veterans lost to suicide is staggering. It's epidemic. More veterans will take their lives as we visit this morning. Each veteran is a precious child of God, and each loss to suicide is a tragedy that might have been prevented.
Clay enlisted in the Marines in May of 2005 at the age of 23 and served in the infantry. In January of 2007, he deployed to Iraq's Anbar province near Fallujah. Just 3 weeks into his tour, 2 platoon members had been killed, one his bunkmate in an IED explosion, and another killed by a sniper's bullet. 2 days later, Clay was shot through the wrist by a sniper's bullet that barely missed his head. His wound was severe enough that he was forced to return to the States to his base at 29 Palms, California, to recuperate. He was very distraught about leaving his Marines in Iraq. It was then that Clay began experiencing panic attacks and other symptoms that led to a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress. He was treated with medication and received counseling and appeared to be healing emotionally as well as physically. Following his recuperation from the bullet wound and completion of Marine Scout Sniper School, Clay deployed again with the 2-7 Marines, this time as part of a sniper platoon to Afghanistan near Sangin. His unit experienced the loss of 20 Marines during that deployment, and that unit has recently lost their 14th veteran to suicide. This number is astounding. In talking with the veterans of 2-7, they share concerns about the effect on mental health of being given a weekly dose of mefloquine, an anti-malarial drug. The side effects of this drug, which is no longer used by the military, were obviously known, as Clay was given a different anti-malaria drug since he was already diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. In addition, they are concerned about the physical and mental health effects of burn pit exposure, as there was a burn pit just 50 to 100 feet from their sleeping tent the entire 8 months that they were deployed. They have recently learned that the VA is no longer researching burn pit exposure in connection with mental health issues. And also the effects on mental health of minor traumatic brain injuries are worrisome, as the exposure to daily blasts is routine for most of the troops. With these concerns, just as examples, it's easy to see how any barriers that the veterans face in dealing with the VA for their medical care can be extremely disheartening. We must do something to address the mental health issues that may result in suicide by our brave men and women who've served in the military. We must act with urgency to determine the very best care for them and ensure that they receive it quickly and for as long as it takes for them to lead productive lives and find peace. Clay exclusively used the VA for his medical care after separating from the Marine Corps. He voiced concerns about the care he was receiving, and yet for these veterans, that is their safety zone. That is where he felt comfortable, as people at the VA know about war, and he would not go anywhere else. His treatment consisted primarily of medication, which had been changed from the Lexapro he had previously been prescribed while on active duty to a generic of another SSRI, which had troublesome side effects. During the last 3 months of Clay's life in 2011, he lived in Houston, Texas. In order to be treated at the Houston VA and receive his prescription, he was told he would have to start over as a new patient, as he had moved back to Texas from another state, and that was the protocol. He had his first appointment in January of 2011, and it was mid-March, 10 weeks later, before he actually met with a psychiatrist to receive his new prescription for Lexapro. He waited 2 hours in the VA pharmacy, only to be told that the pharmacy did not stock it because it was a name brand drug, then there was not a generic for it, and it would have to be mailed to him. On the way home from that appointment, Clay called me and said, "Mom, I can't go back there. It's too stressful. I'll have to find a vet center or something." He did begin taking his medication shortly after that, but Clay took his life 2 weeks after that final appointment at the VA. There are no words to adequately describe the helplessness you feel as a parent when something like this happens. After Clay's death, I personally went to the Houston VA Medical Center to receive his records, and I encountered an environment that was highly stressful, large crowds, no one at the information desk, had to flag down a nurse to find the medical records area. I said later I felt as if I were in an airport terminal, and I could not imagine how anyone dealing with post-traumatic stress could successfully navigate in that setting without exacerbating their symptoms. Clay was consistently open about having post-traumatic stress and survivor's guilt, and he tried to help others coping with similar issues. He worked hard in moving forward and found healing by helping people, participating in humanitarian work in Haiti and Chile after devastating earthquakes. He was also in a public service advertising aimed at easing the transition for his fellow veterans, and he helped injured veterans in long-distance road biking events. Clay fought for the veterans in the halls of Congress and participated in the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America annual Storm the Hill to advocate for legislation and to improve the lives of veterans and their families. Yet even though he was doing, quote, all the right things, depression ultimately took his life. I tell you all of these things not to focus on Clay's story as one that is unique, but one that is, as I said, typical of so many of our veterans. They are trying to live normal civilian lives, and ultimately depression is taking them. His story details the urgency needed in addressing these issues. We still hear so many similar stories, and many of Clay's fellow veterans have stayed in touch, close touch, over the past 5 years, and they still share similar frustrations that he had with the transition from active duty to veteran status. What is important for us to focus on today is the cumulative effect on our veterans of these often described battles to obtain their benefits or to receive good medical care, in this case, mental health care. No veteran should have to go through what many of our veterans are having to go through, and parents shouldn't have to testify before congressional committees to compel the VA to fulfill its responsibilities to those who served and sacrificed. Laws should not have to be passed in order for veterans to receive good care, and that good care should be provided for as long as it is needed. We promised that to them when they raised their hand and volunteered to join the military and protect America. As parents, we have asked ourselves many times since Clay's death, why didn't we know more about post-traumatic stress? What signs did we miss? How could we have helped Clay more? At first, these questions were overwhelming, and some days they still are. But we believe that by talking about what happened in our family, we can help other families avoid the tragedy of suicide. Hindsight is 20/20, but often the signs are there and we just miss them for lack of knowledge about PTS and depression and anxiety.
The VA must be a stress-free environment for our veterans. As Susan described, Clay encountered a number of barriers as he transitioned from military service, as he transitioned from the DOD to the VA, and as he tried to navigate the VA system. These unnecessary barriers added additional stress that aggravated his existing condition. This experience is shared by a number of vets we talk with, and many vets just give up. So here are some ideas we would like to offer that we believe would eliminate unnecessary barriers, reduce the stress, get veterans the care they need, and hopefully reduce the chances of suicide. We know that we've all inherited a system, whether you're a congressman or whether you're a director of the VA or in the bureaucracy there, a caregiver. We've inherited this system, and it's almost, in many respects, that the system is what's in the way. So we've got to do what we can to transform that. So none of my comments are addressed at anybody specifically, but all of us collectively, because all of us have to step up and do something about this. In general, provide a seamless transition in the health care of each veteran from the DOD to the VA, and a barrier-free experience throughout the VA system. Every existing and potential barrier needs to be taken down in order to provide ease of access and process throughout the system. The Sommers mentioned about this. Each veteran's active duty would end with an intentional period and process of decompression and restoration. Again, PowerPoints are fine, how to write a resume is fine, but we've trained these folks to go from civilian status to be mighty warriors. And we need to help them to transition back from the war and the theater of war into civilian status. This could begin with the DOD and continue into the VA. Bob McDonald mentioned that less than half of our veterans are in the VA system. Those who have already moved through the military and are out in the civilian life, there's got to be some ways to bring them into the system. But for those who are serving active duty, why not just automatically enroll them in the VA as opposed to requiring them to, after they get out, have to sign up for the Veterans Health Organization. That way you get them in. If they want to opt out, they can opt out. But start with them being in the system. There would be full interoperability of personal health care information from the DOD and the VA, and then from facility to facility within the VA nationwide. Huge barriers in exchange of information. Veterans dealing with the conditions that they're having to deal with have to be asked to totally recreate their medical history. Who in this room can do that? I'm 68 years old. I can't do that. There would be an establishment of a uniform prescription formulary so that the VA has the same drugs available as the DOD, and the VA can simply continue the prescription regimen developed for each veteran by the DOD. Veterans who are dealing with psychological issues are prescribed very, very delicate combinations or cocktails of drugs. If whatever works is determined while they're with the DOD, why ask them to start over again once they're out? That's absurd. The Sommers also referred to this. As part of the initial paperwork, each new recruit would appoint a person, a spouse, a family member, a friend, as a designated party to be informed if the recruit is ever diagnosed as a suicide risk. On reviewing Clay's medical paperwork after his death, we saw that he had been diagnosed as a suicide risk over a year prior to his death. But no one other than his doctor and Clay knew that. If Susan or someone else had known, it might have made a difference. There's probably, HIPAA regulations that interfere with that, but I can tell you something. If I'm a lawyer, and I am, and somebody comes to me in confidence and says, I'm going to commit a crime, I have an obligation by the oath I took to breach that confidence and tell somebody about that. If I'm a pastor, and I am, and somebody comes to me and says, I'm thinking about committing suicide, I've got to breach that confidence and I've got to call somebody. So what in the world is wrong with just at the first step, when that recruit is signing those papers, it's like a power of attorney. Let somebody know. Let's not keep it a secret. Another major area which is essential to the best care for our veterans is the integrity of the VA system. The veteran as patient is central, and the entire VA system must be focused on what is best for the veteran. Everything flows to that. The first step in providing the best care is to do no harm. Do no harm. Before you try to do good, do no harm. Be helpful instead of hurtful. The SAVE Act provides for annual evaluations by an independent third party of VA mental health care and suicide prevention programs. That's a good thing. That way we're assured that the VA is aware and implement, if it isn't already, best practices. There's communication, best protocols, all across the medical spectrum. And in addition, there are a lot of things the SAVE Act does, but another one that I think is prime is this opportunity to recruit psychiatrists and other professionals in ways to take care of their financial obligations in their training. We live in Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas has the third largest veterans population in the nation, I understand. And at Clay's, the time Clay was dealing with this, there were 3 psychiatrists across that whole spectrum. So hopefully that can help with backlogs and things of that nature. We also need laws to deal with problem employees in the VA bureaucracy. We have all heard the stories about bad actors within the system who seem to be bulletproof. Some of these folks have gamed the system to enrich themselves. Others have falsified reports that have resulted in harming our veterans. Some lie to Congress, some refuse to testify to Congress, some laugh at Congress. And they wind up receiving minimal salary cuts and reassignment to other areas of the country, like Houston, Texas. This causes veterans to lose confidence in the VA. It undercuts morale within the system, and it raises public anger and disgust. The VA director needs to be empowered to deal with these people. And if they need to leave the system, get them out of the system. I'm from Texas. Texas is a right-to-work state. That means I can quit any day, and my boss can fire me any day. And that's the way it is. I know that isn't the way it is with some of these unions, but something needs to be done about that. Susan.
As we reflect on the tragedy of our son's suicide, one of the missing pieces for us was education and what to expect and what to look for when Clay returned from deployments and when he separated from the military. In 2007, when he was diagnosed, we had very little knowledge of post-traumatic stress, but we had complete confidence that his medical needs would be taken care of by the military. Again, some of this is repetitive, but part of the SAVE Act calls for the VA to engage with nonprofits and community groups that can help the veterans reintegrate into civilian society. One of the programs we've learned about is ASSIST, and that stands for Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. We believe this program should be part of an overall educational program provided to families of veterans. By focusing on suicide prevention in a very deliberate way, we believe it will make a difference. Team Rubicon is a nonprofit disaster relief organization made up primarily of veterans and first responders, and they teach ASSIST to their members. Jake Wood, the co-founder, and I spoke recently about how Team Rubicon members could help other veterans and their families with ASSIST training by delivering the coursework as a service provider on a contract basis for the VA. Interested veterans and family members could take the training and feel better prepared to handle a situation that might arise with friends or loved one. This interaction would foster community and provide a social safety net for veterans. I'm an educator. I was a teacher. The helplessness you feel when something like this happens and you think, how could I not have been more educated? Why did I not know more? How did I not know who to ask? And the questions are just endless. So if there is a way that we can provide education to family members, to other veterans, because some veterans don't have a supportive family, that will help them know what to do. If we can be proactive and preventative, we'll make a huge difference.
Much of what is needed is just common sense. It really is. We're not medically trained, but we know what good care looks like. I think a lot of folks know, and they can smell it when it's not being offered, or anything that takes away the experience or interferes with the experience of a patient. There are a lot of gaps, there are a lot of disconnects within this problem. Doctors and nurses and psychiatrists and psychologists and pharmacists and other caregivers are trained in their respective disciplines to render the best care to their patients. And they carry that commitment with them into the VA and into other medical organizations. We believe that the problem does not lie with the caregivers. I went on the internet and I pulled down the Hippocratic Oath, which my father took, which David took, other physicians take. And I want to read to you two paragraphs out of the Hippocratic Oath that I think apply across the system, not just to the doctors, but to everybody who's providing care to our veterans. Quote, "I will remember that there is art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drug. I will remember that I do not treat a fever chart, a cancerous growth, but a sick human being whose illness may affect the person's family and economic stability. My responsibility includes these related problems if I'm here to care adequately for the sick." So we suggest that these statements, these concepts, this oath, generate and saturate this system as we care for these veterans.
In closing, I first would like to reference the photo that you're seeing of Clay. That was in Haiti. And he, like most moms out here, if you want to know what your kids are doing, you've got to be on Facebook and they've got to friend you. So when he, I guess when he was leaving the Marines, he friended me so that I could keep up with him. He was on the go so much. And this was in Haiti, and the caption under it was, "The most important moment in my life, period." Clay had been to 2 wars. He had been in Iraq, he had been shot, he had received a Purple Heart, he had gone back as a scout sniper to Afghanistan in what he called a very, I think his description was a nasty tour. And yet when he left, where he found peace was in Haiti, helping this young mom and her little boy and getting his leg fixed. And when you see your child, and yes, he was a 28-year-old decorated Marine, but he's still your child. When you see your child coming out of something like war and turning to something like this for their peace and just to continue on with life, you just don't dream that things are ever going to get to the point where they're going to take their lives. It just is something that you just can't fathom. So in closing, my hope is that everyone here today and everyone who comes into contact with our veterans and their families will be encouraged to see the bigger picture. These are brave young men and women who volunteer for our military. Their families become military families the day their loved ones take that oath to protect our country. When my son died, I learned all the struggles he dealt with, and I remember telling a reporter, "This is America. We must take better care of our men and women when they come home from war. They should never have to struggle or fight for the benefits they were promised. We are a better people than that." My hope is that the work done to provide excellent mental health care for our veterans will also help our civilian population. In my opinion, the biggest hurdle is not the lack of medical knowledge of how to treat post-traumatic stress, depression, or anxiety, or how to address moral injury or survivor's guilt. No, the biggest challenge is to provide a VA that veterans have confidence in as the place that they turn to when they need help with physical and mental challenges. We owe that to every veteran, and we owe it to them now, not 10 years from now. They have earned that level of care, and we need to keep our promise to our veterans and their families. Thank you for inviting us to share our story with you today.